he's difficult.
Ken? No, Ken's a puppy dog.
The Ford versus Ferrari film tells the story of the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1966. All great movies deserve a sequel, and there's an obvious candidate for Ford versus Ferrari 2.
They believed they were just going to come back and win it next year, which they did, right? So that car won 3 more years in a row.
This time, Ferrari is seeking revenge for Ford's victory in '66.
For sure, the 67 race is probably less on a economical, political way as interesting as the 66 race, but on the sports view, it's probably a better one. I mean, with better preparation from Ferrari, with Daytona maybe creating a little bit some interrogation in the Ford team about their capacity to be sure to win a second time in a row Le Mans.
Once again, Ford pins its hopes on Carroll Shelby, played by Matt Damon, but it has lost Ken Miles, who Christian Bale played well. Miles' death results in the J-Car project being scrapped.
Missing maybe, for sure, Ken Miles, that died 2 months after the 66 race as he was testing the evolution of the Ford GT40, the J evolution of the GT40.
It was tough because I was there and I saw it happen, and I saw the ball of fire flying through the air, and thankfully I wasn't the first person there because I arrived when the car was on fire and all the other guys were there, but I thought my dad was still in the car. And I said, can't we get the fire out? Can't we get him out? And he said, well, he's not in the car. And I thought, oh, cool, he got out. Where is he? But they said he's over there, and then I actually saw him laying in the dirt, dead. So that was a little rough right there.
And for sure, there were probably the ghost of Miles in '67, because we all know that for Shelby and Miles, immediately after the end of the race in '66, there was the idea to come again in '67 and for sure to win Le Mans.
This story starts in the 1967 Daytona 24 Hours, and it doesn't exactly go to plan for Ford.
After Le Mans '66, Enzo Ferrari clearly told his guys to do whatever it takes to beat Ford, and the new 330 P4 was a huge step forward over Ford's GT40 Mark II. Even in testing at Daytona, the drivers were told not to beat Ken Miles' lap record because they knew Ford spies would be watching. But they did it anyway, and when team boss Eugenio Dragoni returned to Italy just before Christmas, Enzo fired him.
Despite entering 6 GT40 Mark IIs, Ford's race is a total disaster. Ferrari dominates, running the final 30 minutes in a nose-to-tail formation. The cars fan out at the finish line for a 3-wide photograph, which would be hung proudly on the wall back in Maranello. This was Enzo's revenge for Le Mans '66, beating Ford, now on its home turf.
Ford was destroyed by Ferrari in this race. New team boss Franco Lini had his guys running like clockwork, while Ford was the opposite and plagued by many technical problems. If Ford believed it was invincible after the 1966 Le Mans win, that illusion was shattered by this race. Lord knows what Henry Ford II had to say about it, but it'd make a great scene in a film.
The demoralized Shelby team then rented Daytona for testing, to work out just what had gone so badly wrong. Focus also turns to the new GT40 Mark IV, the first of its cars designed and built in the United States.
From '66 to '67, I feel those are 2 different eras, to be honest. Because you go from the Ford GT40 Mark II to the Mark IV that really looked like a 1970s prototype. That car really paved the way to the prototypes that you would see in the '70s. And Ferrari went from the P3 to the P4, and pretty much everybody who loves car agreed that the P4 may be one of the most, if not the most beautiful car ever made, and probably the most expensive as well.
Now it's Ford's turn to seek revenge on Ferrari for the Daytona defeat.
As much as Le Mans '66 was interesting, Le Mans '67 at every level was such a much better race.
At Le Mans, 4 of the new streamlined Fords are ready, 2 going to Shelby's team. Much like Shelby had to persuade Ford management about Miles in '66, star driver Dan Gurney fights very hard to have AJ Foyt in the team for an all-American driver squad. Foyt has never raced at Le Mans, but just scored his third Indy 500 victory. Determined to repay that faith, AJ allows Gurney to refine the setup of the car all through practice. Ferrari brings 3 new P4s with Daytona winners Chris Amon and Lorenzo Bandini leading its line. Although Ferrari sets the pace in testing, Ford takes pole thanks to Bruce McLaren. The GT40 is aided by a superior straight-line speed, but hindered by high-speed cornering instability. Another problem is cracked windscreens, which leads to Ford shattering a Boeing 707 with 7 replacements apparently placed in first-class seats.
And away they go for 2 trips around the clock. The 35th edition of the 24 Hours of Le Mans has started.
As the race kicks off, there's early drama for Mike Salmon, whose JWA-run Ford bursts into flames on the Mulsanne straight. He managed to steer the car to the Marshall post at Mulsanne corner, but suffers severe burns in doing so. Another fire takes out the Amon Ferrari due to a puncture that he was unable to fix trackside. Damage from which sparks a conflagration in the engine bay that causes the car to burn out. Ford is running 1-2-3 at 3 AM, but Mario Andretti suffers a huge crash at the S's due to incorrectly installed brake pads. Mario hits the barriers on both sides of the track, breaking his ribs. 2 following Fords also crash as they attempt to avoid the wreckage. One of those drivers, Roger McCloskey, commandeers a Marshall's car to drive Andretti to the medical center. Amid the drama, Gurney and Foyt rocket away into a substantial lead. Ferrari is adamant that the rapid pace can't last, but Gurney has devised a lift and coast approach to the tighter corners from high speed. And this helps save the brakes, the Ford's Achilles heel, compared to the lighter Ferraris.
Dan Gurney was one of our sport's great innovators. You've heard of a Gurney flap, right? This guy was wicked fast, but had a great engineering brain too. The way he nursed the brakes was so smart, and he'd save a ton of fuel using lift and coast as well. He really was ahead of his time.
Every speed record were broken in '67. It's like the massive amount of investment that Ford brought in '64, '65, '66 came to fruition in '67 when everybody upped their game. And then you could see cars and teams and cars looking like what they would look like in the '70s.
Perhaps the biggest Hollywood moment of this sequel is the bizarre standoff that occurs between Gurney and Ferrari's Mike Parks. The Ferrari is running 4 laps behind the Ford, but hounds Gurney incessantly, flashing his lights to the point that Dan pulls his car to a halt on the grass verge at Arnage. At this point, Park does the same thing. Then follows a battle of wills over who will drive away first. Gurney said they were stationary for a dozen seconds. Imagine that for celluloid tension, until Parks blinks first and finally drives away.
This must be one of the most insane things that's ever happened, never mind just at Le Mans. 2 lead drivers just sitting there on the grass verge, waiting for the other to go. It reminds me of another classic Gurney moment at the Daytona Continental in 1962. His engine blew in the final 15 minutes of the race, so he coasted to the top of the banking just before the finish line and sat it out. When the checker falls, he hits the starter with the car in gear, and he lets gravity win the race for him. Gurney was a genius. Parks was never going to win the mind game against him.
The 2 is 5th, 8 laps back. The Ford 57 of Ronnie Bucknam.
Despite many problems for the other Fords, Gurney and Foyt win the race by 4 laps, ahead of 2 humble Ferraris.
And it's done. Gurney and Foyt, a second victory for Ford here at Le Mans. It was risky.
We have seen that the '67 race has been a tough race. And at the end, you have that second victory for Ford, but Ferrari finishing second with that very beautiful, for me, one of the cars that should have won Le Mans, the Ferrari P4. And you have at the end that overall distance, which is amazing, that shown that the level of the battle in 67 has been really high from the beginning until the end between Ford and Ferrari, with the victory of two American legends, Dan Gurney and A.G. Foyt.
Story for the year will be remembered for the Ford #1. The engine was worrying off the start. They led for 20.
After the race, Gurney spontaneously shakes and sprays the bottle of champagne handed to him, sparking a tradition that lasts until this day. He even manages to soak Henry Ford II and his new wife too. As an epilogue, Gurney drives his American-built Eagle Westlake to victory in the Belgian Grand Prix the following week, etching his name forever in motorsport folklore in a Le Mans Formula One winning double that will likely never be repeated. Foyt would never return to Le Mans.
They have to make this sequel. In my opinion, it's an even better storyline than Le Mans 66. Having two American heroes behind the wheel, Matt Damon reprising his role as Shelby, it all makes Hollywood sense to me.
Gurney and Foyt, a second victory for Ford here at Le Mans. It was risky, it was perilous, and achieved with a panache that just has to be admired.